I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Rajneeshi cult up in the northwest part of the United States, or in Oregon. About 40 years ago, they were involved in the very first bioterrorism plot on the planet, we think. They had a couple of people who they thought could potentially make it into the city council. And so they had some city council members up and ready to go, and they realized about 2 nights before the election that they were not going to get enough votes. So it was a Sunday that they went into these restaurants and a few others that a lot of locals would go to after church, and they tainted the salad bars and the other things they could taint with salmonella. They gave salmonella poisoning to tens of thousands of people in the area. Most of them were churchgoers. They wanted to make sure that they didn't go to the polls the following day to vote. They were caught, and a bunch of people were put in jail. But that piece of information will come back to play here in just a little bit with a game that we are developing at Pearson. Let me tell you, I want to talk for just a moment about 2 things that a lot of people seem to really struggle with in education. And I know this because I go around the world talking about these things on a regular basis. I want to talk just briefly about MOOCs, and I want to talk about gamification. Now, if you are like most institutions that I have ever been to, there are 3 kinds of people at your institution, all right? First of all, there are the evangelists. There are those who say technology will save the day, it will save the world, it will save everything. They often overpromise and underdeliver, and they shout from the rooftops that everybody should be using technology just sometimes for the sake of using technology. On the other hand, we have what I like to refer to as the cave people, colleagues against virtually everything. Do you know these people? Think about a cave person right now. You probably know a few. If you can't think of one, by the way, it might be you, so sure. Those 2 groups, I think, tend to resonate the loudest at most institutions. They seem to talk the most and be the most upset all the time and the most forward. I believe that the middle, though, about 80 to 85% of the people fall in between them, and they're the reasonable people. And that's what I'm hoping we can have a conversation about today, is reasonable people talking about MOOCs, talking about games, and talking about what is good about them, as well as what's not so good about them, and potentially how to use them effectively. So really, that's kind of what I'm going for, is to talk to the reasonable people today, and I hope you're here. When we talk about MOOCs, there are a lot of issues with MOOCs, and we have to bring that up. These massive open online courses that Coursera and Udacity, that edX are starting to come out with, all these thousands and thousands of students that are in those courses. They've got some struggles. And this list right up here is just a few of the challenges that we have. There's simply not enough of these big name subject matter expert gurus to go around to bring in 100,000 students like Sebastian Thrun was able to do in that very first MOOC with Peter Norvig. And at the same time, there's the 25% rule for accreditors. You cannot have more than 25% of your curriculum coming out of a vendor or a commercial platform. It can't happen. So it's got to be coming from your institution. That means that you have to now provide all of the infrastructure and all the things around the MOOC, and that means all the expertise and all the curriculum. That's not always easy for any school to do. When you start thinking about the way that communication takes place in these, it's very downward, it's not very collegial. There's a reason that the retention rates are so poor. They're 5%, 6% in some of these. I think the very best retention I've ever seen in any MOOC was a MOOC on gamification, and they actually got a 42% retention rate. That's not fantastic, but compared to the others, it's tremendous. So MOOCs have some struggles, but at the same time, we know that we have a lot of people in the world that need to be educated, and MOOCs are one way to begin thinking about doing that at scale. So as we talk about the massive open online course arena, I think we have to understand that there are some struggles, but we can start to deal with some of those challenges. Now at the same time, when I talk about games and gamification, now I know that there are people in every academic audience who just think, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. I'm not going to play Monopoly in my class to teach accounting. I mean, that's silly. I'm not going to do it. And so I have a little exercise that I want to show you. I understand where you're coming from, okay? I need you to be in little groups of 3 or 4. In fact, if you would you please grab the hands of a group of people so that there's 3 or 4 of you together? All right? 3 or 4 of you together. Even if you have to stand up, that's okay. Grab the hands. There we go. There you go. No, we have more. 3 or 4, 3 or 4, there we go. Perfect. Okay. The people who you just held hands with, you are on a boat. You're on a ship. That ship is sinking. All right? You have 30 seconds to determine who gets in the life raft and who does not. You will all get in the life raft except, unfortunately, for one of you. That one person that's in the water, I guarantee you're not going to make it. All right? Sharks, too cold. Sorry, you're just not going to make it. You have 30 seconds to figure out who gets in the life raft, who does not. Go.
No, it's me. I'm stronger than all of you. I'm old. I've had my life.
15 seconds.
Done. No, I've already jumped in.
Your life raft somehow?
I'm gone.
Then all 4 of us?
Okay, I hope you all decided. If not, you're all goners. I need the people who are getting in the life raft to stay seated. People who are getting in the water, stand up.
I'm going in the water. I'm going in the water.
All right, thanks.
There you go.
People,
Yeah, in the water. Give them a round of applause for
you were dead, so they go.
Now, that is a game that can talk all about ethics and all sorts of other things. But you know the problem with that game? I'm going to go ahead and answer that question for you. It's stupid. That game is ridiculous. And you all know it's ridiculous. I guarantee that there was one person, or at least one person in this room, who when I said, you're in a boat, you went, oh dear. Great. And then when I said, so one of you's not going to make it because you're going to get in the water, I know, somebody in the room thought, I'll do it, whatever. Right? Because you're not going to die. And you know you're not going to die. That kind of game is silly. That's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about games, I'm talking about games like Folded. Folded is a game that was created by HIV researchers who could not figure out for 15 years why and how a retrovirus protein actually replicated. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't get the pattern down. They couldn't find a pattern. Finally, somebody said, why don't we turn it into a massive role-playing game? We'll let gamers have at it. Let's see if they can come up with something. The gamers figured it out in 3 weeks. They now know how and why it replicates the way it does. They believe this is what's going to be finally the cure for AIDS. I'm talking about Enter Zon. This is a game that teaches conversational Chinese. You are dropped in the middle of virtual China wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. All right, you have to learn to speak Chinese in order to get food, in order to get shelter, in order to get clothing, in order to get a job. You've got to do all of that speaking Chinese over Skype. This is a free game that was created by a man named Dr. Zhao at Michigan State when he was there. He's now in Oregon. But he wanted to teach people to speak conversationally in Chinese. The only English that you get comes from this little avatar that follows you around as sort of a dictionary, and you get a newspaper sort of dropped at your feet every morning. People are learning conversational Chinese in 3 and 4 times the rate that they are in a traditional classroom. Sitting in a lecture, going to a lab, doing the things that educators normally have them do. Games are powerful. I'm talking about what John Seeley Brown said. He's the noted physicist. He's worked with NASA. When he came out in the Wall Street Journal and he said, you know what? I would rather hire a level 70 World of Warcraft guildmaster than a Harvard MBA. Now Harvard called and said, John, now come on. You went to Harvard. Why would you say that? That's silliness. He said, no. A guildmaster at level 70 has hired and fired. They've created professional developments. They have created strategy around these raids that they all go and do together. They have done what you guys are teaching the theory about in your courses. I want the person who's done it. Now their response, of course, was that's silly. No one would ever hire somebody based on their World of Warcraft experience. And he reminded them that the president of Yahoo, who took Yahoo from the 90s into the 2000s, that is exactly why they hired him. And he was considered by most to be the best president Yahoo's ever had. They then hung up, I'm sure. But games don't have to be like that silly little thing that we just engaged in. They can be very serious and very real and very impactful as we go. You heard my bio a little while ago. I won't give you too much more. This would be my electronic resume. Right? This would be my Wordle. If you're not familiar with Wordle, it's a cool little tool that you put words in, and the words that use the most are the biggest, words that use the least are the smallest. This would be my electronic resume. You see up there that I am a professor. I teach communication and rhetoric. I teach education courses. I teach online. But at the same time, you might notice I'm a husband and I'm a father. I've got a daughter named Addie. We've got a dog named Doug. I mean, these are the things that make up this guy that you see in front of you. But it's not until you put all of this into a meaningful pattern that you start to get a decent sense of who I am. Well, what I want to talk about today are what I like to think of as the C's of education. Curriculum integration, creativity, competency. There's so many things around education that we can talk about when we're trying to navigate these C's. I want to see if I can't help put them in a little bit more meaningful pattern for you by the time that I'm done. All right, so that we all have a place to go where we're talking using the same language, we're talking about the same concepts, especially when it comes to gamification and massive open online courses. Now to do that, I'm really just going to talk about one thing, and then you're going to do some stuff. We're going to talk about research driving practice, and then you're going to try some things. Okay, and then I'll try to summarize all that when it's all said and done. So in terms of research, you heard at the beginning that I run a research center. And that's what I do for Pearson. That's my Pearson hat, is that I run the Center for E-Learning. And we're essentially kind of like a Bell Labs think tank. That's what we do. We look for academic problems and academic solutions. They don't have to have anything to do with a Pearson product or service. We promote some back to Pearson and say you might want to consider doing this, but that's kind of how it works. And so as such, we're constantly trying to look at the future. We're constantly trying to look at the landscape, look at what's a good research question that we want to ask. And to that end, we wrote a movie. Last summer, we came out with a movie, a 21-minute short film called School of Thought. You can see it on YouTube if you'd like. It's been broken into 3 vignettes. There's the story of a mom who's returning to get her nursing degree, her son who's a high schooler and what his life is like, and then her daughter in middle school, what her life is like in school. But it's basically taking the concept of what I call Education 3.0. If you put together neuroscience, learning research, and education technology, and you put those together in a way that is best for learners, I think that in 3, 4, 5 years, the movie that we created might actually become reality. It might be a little utopian, but you'll see. I want to show you just a little clip of what I'm talking about. This was the mom's story. This is Simone. And this is what we think that life might look like for her in her future.
Notifications allowed her computer assistant to know we had passed in front of a significant...
Help! I need help down here! Hurry! I don't know what's happening. I just found him laying here. I don't know what's wrong with him.
Galileo, I need an analysis of his plan.
Aconite, also known as wolfsbane or the queen of poisons, contains...
Stop, Galileo! Notify ER of possible toxic shock. Also bring up poison protocol.
Okay, you lost him. You can stop. Okay, Simone, what did you miss here?
I'm not sure.
Can anyone help out here?
Bronchoconstriction?
Yes. But remember, that the airway can become constricted, especially in possible cases of poisoning, like this one. Peter, can you share your notes on this exercise from last term with Simone? Sure. Okay, Jim, you're up.
Now, I don't know if the world will look like that, but we certainly have the ability today to turn almost any wall into what's known today as a cave. We can project images on there. We can use those as touchscreen elements. This, as you start to think about the notion of simulation, really starts to take that into a whole new light, doesn't it? But I realize that what I'm talking about here is a connection to some things that we have all been enculturated into or against. And I get that. When we talk about perception, there are really two kinds of perception. There's internal perception. There is that you believe to be true about yourself, that you believe to be true about other ideas. They're your perceptions. Then there's external perceptions, those that others believe about you, or those that others believe about your thoughts or ideas. And I'm going to do an exercise on this in just a second, but just to give you an illustration of what I'm talking about when these two things collide, when these two things merge, take a look at the Venn diagram for perception at my house. This is what it looks like. There are times, you heard, I did stand-up comedy through my undergrad degree and my master's, and there are times I will say things to my wife that I just think are a scream. And I'll say, I'm really sorry, honey, I just can't turn it off. And without missing a beat, she'll look at me and she'll go, why don't you try? Okay. Now let me show you this at work. I'd like you to all think about your favorite ice cream flavor. Okay, don't tell anybody. Just think about it. If you could have one ice cream flavor the rest of your life, what would you choose? Now that you've got that, I'd like you to turn to someone sitting next to you. I'd like you to look them up and down. And then I'd like you to say, I think your favorite ice cream flavor must be, and then tell them what you think it must be. And then, here's the important part, tell them why. Why did you choose that flavor for them? Go ahead.
I've never met you before either. I think so. Homemade vanilla. Rocky Road. Okay. Peach. Okay. No, it's not. Okay. Cots. On a different note. I originally thought strawberry because you've got red hair. See,
Okay,
vanilla
perfect.
was the first thing, but then I'm
You did what audiences around the globe have done with this exercise, and I've done this hundreds of times. You did exactly what I was hoping you would do. Let me tell you the common reaction to that question. When I ask you to say that to someone else, here's what usually happens. No, I don't know what you've said, but I can see your reaction, all right? And your reaction for most people is something like this. You hear it, your favorite ice cream flavor must be, and you go, no. Right? And that's what most of you did. However, in this room, this small room of people, I saw two people make this is my favorite expression. Somebody tells you whatever that flavor must be, and then this is the reaction. And you can tell they're offended. I don't know what was said. You know, chunky monkey. I think vanilla offends people. Like, what am I playing? I don't know. That's the difference between internal perception and external perception. Okay? Now, when it comes to perception around education, we all have ideas. We all have constructs. We all have things that we think are thematic and correct and best. And I think about guys like Mark Edmondson. Mark Edmondson is in Virginia, and he wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times last summer that said, can't we all just agree that education technology is good in very, very small circles, but it's not good for everyone. It might be good for a shut-in, if you want to have e-learning, but other than that, e-learning really doesn't work for anybody. E-learning is not best for anybody. Can't we all just agree on that? We all know, and this is what he went on to say, we all know that the best education system is one that is high in lecture. Because the lecture can change the world. The lecture can motivate. The lecture can inspire. A great lecturer can do amazing things with students, and that's why they come to our schools, is to hear these great lectures. Now, I think about that sort of thing. I'll tell you right away, I didn't agree with that, but I think about it. And I started asking audiences. I go and I speak to audiences of 50, 500, 5,000, and I use this tool called Poll Everywhere. And I started polling audiences right after that came out, and I said, well, how many great lecturers did you have at your institution when you went to college or university? And with all of these thousands of data points that I had come in, you know what the average was? 3. Most people said 3. We had 3 great lecturers at my school. That's not good odds, right? I think, when you have 40, 50, 60 potential lecturers throughout your lifetime. And I know that Mark Edmondson, what he said, I could see the looks on some of your faces were a little bit frustrated with that, as mine were as well. Thinking that's not the end-all be-all of education. A great lecturer is amazing. Yes, 1 time, 2 times, but how many lecturers can provide a great lecture every single day? It's just not possible. But if you look at The National Survey of Student Engagement. This is the one that came out in 2006. The 2009 results were almost identical. 50% of students are in lecture environments, 50% of the time. All right, so our student groups are getting lectured at. 50% of all of their educational experiences, half the time, they're being lectured at. The other half, I hope, are really engaging. I'm sure that also then includes assessment and some other things. But 50% of the educational experiences are lecture. So I think Mark Edmondson, while I don't agree with him, and while the research and the literature probably doesn't agree with him, I think a lot of the lecturers agree with him. Then I think about Eric Mazur. Eric Mazur was voted Lecturer of the Year twice at Harvard. He's a physics professor. He is really quite amazing. If you ever get a chance to hear him, he speaks at conferences around the world. But he actually has a blog now called Confessions of a Converted Lecturer. He doesn't lecture anymore. And let me tell you why. He realized that even though he was being really exalted as a great lecturer, his students weren't learning. And it was really frustrating to him. And so he started doing something really interesting that only a Harvard professor would do. He hooked his students up to a machine that would measure their brain activity throughout a week. Right? That's what you do at Harvard, right? That's how you handle things at Harvard. So he sent 70 students just off into the world over a couple of semesters, and he just wanted to see what happened to their brain activity during a normal week. Now, I'm going to show you one. I really recommend that you go to the web and you check all of these pictures out. You'll see all 70 of them. They're really quite amazing, but they're almost identical. Okay? I'm just going to show you one that really typifies what everybody else experienced. This is what a Harvard student's brain looks like during their week. I'd like you to pay particular attention to what happens when they go to their lectures. Their brains flatline. They look dead. Do you see the only other time in the week when their brains look the same way? When they're watching television. That is the only other time that your brain is experiencing that kind of passive experience. Look what happens when they're sleeping. Your brains are so much more active when you're asleep. I think if you want to get the most out of a lecture, you sleep during it. Then you're really going to get you're really set. Our brains are not wired for lecture. Right? They're just not. Occasionally, a great lecture can do amazing things. But that suggests that it has been practiced and polished many times to get to a place where it's great, where it's worthy of a TED Talk. All right? If you start looking at what we know about the brain, we need context. We need multiple sensory inputs. We need things to happen in our brain that are helpful, which is why simulations are so powerful. When I'm sitting in front of this simulator and I'm looking at the different muscle settings or the ocular settings, the cranial nerve settings, first of all, I don't have to go to a clinic and watch this happen over the course of 3 months, hopefully. I can experience it all in 20 minutes. And it is so engaging because I'm actually being active in the process. I'm actually clicking on the different things and seeing what it looks like, and I can practice over and over and over again as much as I want to. Think about that versus trying to explain all of that during a lecture. I'm going to give you a little test of your memory. All right? John Medina is a researcher up in the Northwest who has written a book called Brain Rules, highly recommend it. And he has done some study around how much we can remember at any given time. When we talk about lecture and the audio centricity of words, we really don't have very good memories for that. I want to see if I can show you what I'm talking about. I am going to show you a list of words, and I want you to remember as many as you possibly can. And I'm going to ask you in about 3 or 4 minutes how many of them you can remember, okay? You're only going to see them for a couple of seconds, so pay as close attention as you possibly can to this list of words. Everybody ready? Study these words now. And good. All right, we'll come back to that. What we are talking about is declarative versus non-declarative information. When your brain divides information, that's how it divides it. Declarative information is explicit. They are facts, they are events, they are a list of words, whether spoken or read. Okay? These are just pieces of information. Now, we know about the brain that you actually need more information to remember that. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. When you attach to declarative information, non-declarative information, like context, like story, like senses, when you can wrap those things around your declarative information, you will remember them better. Everybody do me a favor. Close your eyes for a second. Think about a place that you used to go as a kid that you have good memories of. A place that you liked. A place that you were fond of. Now, as you're picturing that place, picture the visuals, what it looked like. Try to smell the smells. Try to hear the sounds. If there was a feeling to it, try to feel what that's like. You can even rub your fingers together to help. Okay, come on back. Most of you should have been able to do what I just asked you to do. That is declarative and non-declarative information working in tandem so that you can remember the facts as well as the sense elements. That's how our brains work. And we know this. Our brains funnel this information down into the hippocampus. As those pieces of information go, and they go in tandem, down the neural pathways to the hippocampus, they actually part company. Your hippocampus contains the non-declarative information in one part of the hippocampus, the declarative information in another part. To get that information out, you have to pull one or the other out that's more impactful, more important to you, and the other will come with it, all right? This is something that is true for every human being. This has nothing to do with visual learners or audio learners. No, there's nothing about preference here. This is how the brain works. The process is called visual indexing, okay? I can mess with your visual indexing. Let me show you how I can mess with this. I want you, in just a minute, I'm going to show you another list of words. I want you to read it out loud. I want you to read it as fast as you can. I want you to read it top to bottom. But I don't want you to read the word. I just want you to read the color. Okay? Fast as you can, top to bottom, out loud, go.
Red, yellow, red, blue, red, yellow,
I heard mistakes on word 3. Now, why is that so hard? That's the Stroop test for my psychologists in the room. But the reason that's so difficult is because you encoded that information, cognitively speaking, at roughly the same time. You learned the symbols for words, cognitively speaking, about the same time that you learned what color was, between the ages of 2 and 6. And that information is deeply embedded in your brain. And I'm asking you to take one over the other, when in your minds they should work in harmony because you've known them for so long. That's visual indexing at work, okay? So as we start to think about what we're doing here, we're trying to train neurons in our brains to connect to other things. Take a look at this trained neuron versus the untrained neuron. The untrained neuron doesn't have a lot of those little tendrils coming out there. They're called neurites. Those neurites are looking for other things to cling to. Okay? Think of it kind of like a glacier. They're carving little pathways of water into that glacier, looking for other pathways to connect to form a river. All right? That untrained neuron was essentially given information one time in one way, like a lecture. The trained neuron, however, is a neuron that you can actually see in an fMRI machine where the information was given to a person in 2 or more ways. So they were maybe told it, shown it. They experienced it as well as reading it, whatever. That's training a neuron. And that's what we're after in education, because when that happens, and those connections start to be made, people remember better. They remember more. They remember as they go. This also has something to do with John Medina calls pattern recognition. Pattern finding is extremely powerful for the brain. When you see that lion in that grass, your brain does something that doesn't happen any other time. Your brain releases 2 chemicals at the same time. You know what those are? You've heard of them. It releases endorphins and dopamine at the same moment. When you find a pattern that you didn't know existed before, you release the hormone that makes you relaxed and the one that makes you excited at the same time. Isn't that strange? What that does for us? It allows our brains to light up like a Christmas tree in an fMRI machine. Suddenly, there's electrical impulses going all over the place. And when that happens, something unique takes place. We have about a 7-minute window by which to really focus, really critically think, really problem solve, really be creative. We've got this nice little opportunity to really pounce. And you know what's good for that? Games. Games allow for pattern finding. Games allow for pattern recognition. As you start to see how games work, that's what we're doing. We're trying to make a pattern out of something that has happened together. Now, I want to see how you did on our memory test. Okay? I showed this to you 3 or 4 minutes ago. I gave you a simple list of words. I told them to you and said them to you. Let's see how well you can remember them. All right? Raise your hand if you agree with what the statement that I'm about to make. If the word candy was on the list, go ahead and raise your hand. All but 2 of you. All right? Yes. Very good. It was. If you say the word car was in the list, go ahead and raise your hand. Nobody. I didn't fool anybody. Good. The answer is no. If you say the word sweet was on the list, raise your hand. No. Sweet was not on the list. They were sweet things. And you know what your brain just did? You just added non-declarative context to a declarative set of facts. First of all, think about it when you send a reading home with your students. All right, you ask them to go read the book at night by themselves and then come back to class. You know what they've just done? They have filled in all kinds of gaps with non-declarative information that may or may not be right. But at the same time, as we start to think about how we're trying to get our students to retain this information, just simply speaking it to them, even if you speak it to them with a list in front of them, is not enough for most people to retain it for any length of time. All right? That's something that we have to start to consider. Now, there are ways around this. Neural coupling is one of them. Neural coupling happens if you look at an audience of people when they are told a story. Something really amazing happens, again, in those fMRI machines where you can see the brain light up. As the speaker's brain lights up, so do the audience members. In other words, when I'm telling you a story, my brain is lighting up in a very specific pattern, very specific nodes light up at specific times. The audience's mirrors that. It does the exact same thing. It's remarkable. However, if I take the facts out of that story and just tell you the facts, then my brain lights up and yours go dark. Just the facts don't light up your brains. They don't make much impact at all in terms of retention. Let me show you the power of this at work. This is a commercial from IKEA. I'd like you to see the power of story.
Any of you feel bad for this lab? That is because you're crazy. It has no feelings. And the new one is much better.
Did you feel badly for the lab? How can you not? That horrible music, right? It's so sad. That's the power of narrative. Narrative is something that really allows us to add context to element, settings to element, characters to element, things we wouldn't ever experience otherwise. And you know what's full of narrative? Games when they're done right. You've got a storyline. Even a wafer-thin storyline can make all the difference in the world as students begin to keep playing. I think about the Harvard Assessment Series when I think about a lot of these things. Richard Light found out back in the 90s, for about a 10-year period, he interviewed 1,600 students. 1,600, 2 to 3 hour interview, 24-page interview guide. It was a huge thing. You can see the results online. I encourage you to take a look at them. But there are a couple of things that really do apply to what we're talking about here. Richard Light found out, for example, that choice and motivation are dealt with early on with students. Students were asked what their experience was like with college. And there were basically 2 answers. There were, I really liked it and it was okay. The really liked it and okay gave a follow-up answer to another question that was very interesting. When the just okay crowd was asked, how did you pick your classes when you first got to campus? This was the answer they gave. I got my prereqs out of the way. I just did the junk that wasn't fun so that I could do the good stuff later. Now, when they were asked why they did that, they said they were given that advice from an advisor, from a parent, from a sibling. Somebody else told them to do that, and so they did. And they didn't have a very good experience in college. However, the group that was asked about that said I liked, or mostly liked, my experience, they gave a very different answer. They said every year I took a few classes that interested me, that I liked, that were fascinating. Sometimes they weren't even in their major. That choice that they were able to use gave them some intrinsic motivation, some control over what they were doing. Choice and motivation are filled in games. You have a lot of intrinsic motivation that goes along with game because people want to get better. Yes, they fail a lot. They fail about 80% of the time, but it's a safe place to do so. And what shouldn't education be just that? A safe place to fail? Rather than you fail once and you get the F? Games provide a safe platform to fail that gives choice and gives motivation. At the same time, I think you'll be able to see this at work. I'd like you to play a game with me just for a second. That bird almost hit you? I thought it was going to run in the window. Here's what I want to do. I'd like you to partner up. You need to be in twos, please. And you're going to need something to write on between you.
I have paper, but no pen.
Congratulations for bringing paper.
You just got tossed out of the boat.
You are playing for 1 gigabyte of storage apiece. Okay? Here's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a list. This list is a bunch of culturally bound phrases, and you need to figure out as many on this list as you can in 90 seconds. Let me give you the first one. First one looks something like this, so go ahead and write this down. This is the first answer. You're going to see 60 M and an H. The answer is 60 minutes in an hour. Okay? I want you to get as many of these as you possibly can in 90 seconds. Okay? In 90 seconds. Everybody ready? On your mark. Get set. Go.
Oh, yeah.
15 seconds is gone. $30 seconds is gone. You have a minute remaining. Half your time is left. $30 seconds. $15 seconds.
Yeah.
10 seconds. 5. And done. All right. Now, before I give you the answers, I want you to notice a couple of things. First of all, I use that game in my class with my students. I actually have an electronic version of that that shows the clock ticking down because I want them to understand that time is palpable. You can actually feel time in your brain. That really mean thing I was doing to you by telling you how much time was left sped up your brains, believe it or not. The last half of that, your brains were actually calculating faster than the first half. Now, for about 75% of you, that means you got more answers in the second half of the exercise. For about 25% of you, that means your brains froze up. And you started feeling like, I don't have time, okay? But your brain can feel time. The second thing I want you to notice, you were all engaged. You all participated. You were engaged. Games are intrinsically motivating. Now, you may have just thought, I want to show the rest of the room how smart I am. You may really want this external drive. I don't know. So there may have been some extrinsic motivation going on too. But you were engaged. Let me give the answers so we can see if we have a winner here. Starting in the upper left, 60 minutes in an hour. You should all have that one. 36 inches in a yard. 26 letters of the alphabet. 7 wonders of the world. 1001 Arabian Nights. 12 signs of the zodiac. 54 cards in a deck with the jokers. 8 planets in the solar system, plus Pluto. 36,000-mile car warranty. 88 piano keys. 80 days to go around the world. Up in the middle center. 13 stripes on the American flag. 18 holes in a golf course. 32 degrees Fahrenheit at which water freezes. 8 sides on a stop sign. $200 for passing Go in Monopoly. 3 blind mice, see how they run. 90 degrees in a right angle. 10 years in a decade. 4 quarts in a gallon. 20 nickels in a dollar, 2 is the number it takes to tango, 108 double stitches on a baseball. Anybody get that one? This is a hard one. All right, up in the upper right, 24 hours in a day, 1 wheel on a unicycle, 5 digits in a zip code, 57 Heinz varieties, 11 players on a football team, 1,000 words that a picture is worth, 29 days in February in a leap year, 64 squares on a chessboard or checkerboard, 40 days and nights of the Great Flood, 66 books in the Bible, 15 balls on a pool table, 56 kilobits per second. Tally up the number you got, right? If you got 5 or more, raise your hand and keep it raised. Keep it raised if you got 6. Keep it raised if you got 7, 8, 9, 10.
Wow.
Oh, it's been down to you two. How many you guys get?
We got 10.
10?
12.
12!
right.
Round of applause for these guys. Nicely done, nicely done.
You must be like
Games allow choice and motivation. At the same time, Richard Light found out something interesting about socialness. Students in the interview, they were finding that 55% of science students that started that way, ended that way. 45% left. They didn't finish the science majors. Richard Light asked them a simple question: why did you stay a science major? Those that stayed, to the person, gave the same answer. They said, because I joined a study group. At Boston College, at Harvard, at Yale, at several other schools where this interview was done, joining a study group was illegal. It was cheating in 1990. Today, it's required. You know what else provides for socialness? Games. The Mixer is an example of this. You want to learn another language? You go join the Mixer. They will pair you up with someone in another country that speaks that language natively. You will speak over Skype. They will teach you their language. You will teach them yours, playing games on the platform. Socialness matters. Games also equal something that I like to talk about that Richard Light found, that is diversity. Students want diversity. When juniors and seniors were asked the question, do you wish that the people around you, the content around you was different than you or the same as you? They almost to the person said different. I need people who challenge me, people who are unique, people who are different than I am. And that's exactly what games provide. If you do it right, a game provides for collaboration. Now, collaboration is important in our culture. 78% of the time in business, you are in a team. You know how often you're in a team in classes? 17. We are not setting our students up for success when they leave our halls by saying everything is individual. Everything is an individual project. Because most of the time, they're not doing anything individually. Games can provide a platform to do that. My favorite finding of all from the Richard Light study was that tension, what he calls structured disagreement, leads to better learning. Students were simply asked the question, what was your favorite class? The best class that you took? 3% said a lab. 0% said a lecture. 97% said something like this. It was the class where we did something unique. It was the class where we had a mock trial. It was the class where we fed the homeless. It was the class where we presented to the board of Macy's at the end on a new marketing strategy that we had come up with. They were problem-based. They had no set answers. We had to figure out the questions, and we had to figure out the solutions. They were the classes that we loved. And by the way, those were also the classes where they remembered the most. Which led Richard Light to ask a really important question. Why aren't all classes like that? If you look at what games can provide for us, they can actually integrate curriculum across the spectrum. We can start to bring together multiple disciplines into one experience so that students can be challenged by diversity, challenged in terms of teams and collaboration. They can partner up with people they've never partnered up with before if you set up a game correctly. The last point I'm going to make about this is a quote from John Medina, that researcher I told you about. As I was writing Brain Rules, it hit me. If you wanted to design a learning environment that was directly opposed to what the brain is naturally good at doing, you would design something like a classroom. So to that end, let me tell you about a game that we're building. When I was at the University of Northern Colorado, I built a game that I've taken with me to multiple universities, where at the beginning of the event, I am murdered. It was a courtroom communication class, and these are my forensic file pictures, and I am killed. Now, a student is accused of the murder, and a trial then takes place. All right? The students actually become the jury. They are the prosecutors. They are the defense attorneys. They are the forensic science witnesses. They are the journalists who are covering the event. And we brought together students from all of those disciplines to say, how would a journalist cover an actual trial? Let's see. How would a communication student argue or debate a persuasive argument here? How would forensic scientists actually sit on the witness stand at the right time and talk about these problems? These students became the actors in this drama. We asked the question, what if we did that at scale? I had about 400 students, 450 was the most that we ever had, 5 professors, 450 students at these courses that I've done locally. What would happen if we did this at scale? Imagine this. 96 hours ago, this woman was rushed out of an airport in the Northeast where she walked off a plane and she collapsed. After she collapsed, when she was rushed to the airport, she died of symptoms to be determined. Nobody knows why she actually died. Within 48 hours, 10,000 more people around the globe have seemingly died of the same thing. If this continues, we are going to be in the midst of a global pandemic. Within less than a year, we're going to have a third of the population die. How would you handle that? Well, the question is, would you send, if you're a political scientist, a government official, would you send your scientists to a World Health Conference, or would you keep them in-house? How would you deal with this if you were a biologist? You would obviously want to look and see if there was a virus, or if it was a bacteria, or if it was something else. You would want to know if you could slow it. You would definitely want to know if you could stop it. Would you have to use maybe the scientific method to determine that? And wouldn't a teacher be able to watch you do so and determine if you're using the scientific method at all? That's the question that we want to ask. So as we're creating this game that we're calling Contagion, it is a flipped MOOC. We think it's going to be massive. The difference is local instructors are going to be involved. Local instructors are going to come to our game and say, I want to teach my biology students, I want to teach my political science students, I want to teach my journalism students through this narrative experience that we're all going to share. I want to connect my students to students in other disciplines. I want to connect my students to students at other institutions. I want to connect my students to students around the globe. And that's what we're building. I would like for you, just for a few minutes, I want you to see just how much you can do in really a few minutes. I want you to brainstorm something for me. With these 5 disciplines right here, science, political science, business, communication, and medicine, if you at your table could pick one of those, I want you to ask yourself about some of the outcomes for a moment. I want you to ask yourself, define an outcome, talk about the assets you would need in order to achieve that outcome, and then, if you were the game master, what Jane McGonigal would call the puppet master for this particular experience, what would be a curveball that you would throw at your students? If they're going along after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and they think they've got it solved, what would you interject in the way to slow them down and trick them up a little bit and have them have a real-world critical thinking crisis that they have to deal with? What would you do? Really, you're just going to brainstorm with each other for a couple minutes. I want you to see just how much you can do with this. Go. It doesn't happen that often. We don't do a lot of team teaching in this culture. But when you're working with educators that are also rock stars in their disciplines, and you're starting to brainstorm together and give ideas to each other on a project that is really creative and really encourages the kinds of 21st century skills we're after, critical thinking, problem solving, all these things with our students, that's suddenly fun when it comes to educating, isn't it? You all just did that. And I know that you were doing that because the majority of you had micro expressions that you cannot fake that looked like you were engaged. You were doing this. You were doing this. Those are things that just happened because you were excited about it. Now, quickly, I want to hear what's one outcome that somebody had for one of those disciplines. Can we share one? Yeah?
Business, determine who's going to manage this whole thing.
Who's going to manage? So what happens in a financial collapse, right, that would probably happen out of this? And then how do you manage that? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well,
Yeah.
even who's going to manage the whole project?
Oh, the project itself. Okay, good. So it's sort of the meta-analysis of it. Good. Can somebody give me an asset that you think you might want to put in the way for students to find or stumble upon or research or have to use? Yes?
We said that the organism that was causing this would mutate. Or maybe there would be a binary situation, like a binary poison, a binary bacteria and a virus together or some crazy thing.
Oh, wow. Ooh, that's a good one. All right, so that's actually an asset and a curveball kind of thrown together.
Yeah.
Everybody have one other curveball they want to share? That's usually the fun part. Yeah.
We were just talking about the communication field, but if, in the middle of all of this turmoil, there was either like a tsunami or an asteroid or an EMF. Communication's not that late in the 12th century. So something like that would like, now what do you do?
What do you do with no internet? I mean, right? Yeah, it's a great question. My favorite, by the way, my favorite curveball, an ethics professor at University of Iowa said, what happens if you find out the only way to cure the disease is that you have to kill small children? Oh, right? And only an ethics professor would come up with something like that. But do you see where we can start to kind of play with this? Now, what we just did was we started to talk about a pattern that emerges out of those seeds of education. All right? First of all, if you are interested in building a game like that for your institution here at Laterno, I would love to help you with that. I'm doing that for about 6 schools around the country. There's a school in Iowa, a community college in Iowa, that's bringing all of their students to campus over a weekend, and they're going to simulate a flood. They're a power school, and they're a big health program, and they're going to have students that are actors and actresses who are playing to be hurt, and they're going to actually have to get power up and running, and they're going to have to build bridges and all sorts. It's really quite remarkable. They're calling it Cornfield Island. All right? It's going to be an amazing experience. If you would like to do that, please contact me. But if you would like to play our game, please send me an email. We are looking for local instructors to bring their classes to this experience for fall of this year. We've already got our Puppet Master team, our subject matter expert board, working on framing the game right now. But if you would like to bring your students to us, please let me know. And I will send you some information and you can make that decision as we go. I want to thank you very much for your time. I appreciate this. I know you ate during the experience, but you were still a really attentive audience. Thank you for that. I hope that this has been enlightening and interesting. And if you have any questions, please send me an email. I'll, of course, stick around after this, but send me an email. Thanks very much.